They say motherhood is unconditional, a bond unbreakable by time, circumstance, or even disappointment. But I wonder if those people ever heard their own child mutter, "Hope you only live 3 more months," when they thought you were asleep. That's the kind of sentence that doesn't just break your heart, it erases parts of you. It started innocently, or at least that's what I told myself. I get winded carrying the laundry upstairs. My knees ached more than usual. I'd stand in front of the fridge and forget why I opened it. And for someone who'd always prided herself on being sharp, on remembering birthdays, neighbors' cats' names, and every line to steal magnolias, that was a red flag. I was 57, living alone in the same house Peter grew up in. The paint on the porch had peeled to the point where I just called it rustic. The mailbox leaned, the kitchen window stuck on humid days, and my rose bushes had given up on blooming. But it was home. Mine. Comfortable. Predictable. Until it wasn't. I went to Dr. Harris, who still called me Margie, and once sat next to me for an entire Pee-wee soccer season while our boys picked dandelions instead of playing. He ran the usual tests, sent me for a scan, then called me in 3 days later. I knew it wasn't good when his nurse offered me coffee and a granola bar. No one gets carbs if they're just being told it's low iron. He cleared his throat. "Margaret," he said, "I'm sorry. It's cancer. Ovarian. Stage 3. I blinked, looked down at my hands like maybe they could do something. I remember nodding, asking him what the plan was, and thinking how beige his office walls were. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just left the clinic, drove home, and sat at the kitchen table until it was dark outside and the neighbor's porch light came on. I told Peter the next day. He flew in from Chicago, which surprised me. I hadn't seen him in over a year. I thought maybe the old closeness was still there, buried under time and distance and whatever resentment he never voiced. I picked him up from the airport, and we drove mostly in silence. I was waiting for the right moment. There never is one. So I just blurted it out somewhere between the toll booth and exit 14. "They found cancer," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Ovarian. Stage 3. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then, "You should have told me sooner." No panic. No hub. Just that. Later that evening, he sat in his childhood room, now full of old linens and boxes marked Christmas and Peter's trophies. I was on the couch downstairs, pretending to sleep. That's when I heard him on the phone. His voice carried through the walls like heat in summer. "I don't know, man. If she's got 3 months, maybe 6. Honestly, I hope it's 3. Less to deal with." I stopped breathing. Just like that. My own son. My baby. The boy I nursed through croup and chickenpox. Who once wrote "I love my mommy" in crayon on the kitchen wall and swore the dog did it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows on the fan blades. Something inside me didn't just hurt, it shifted. Something big and tectonic. A part of me went cold. The next morning, I made coffee and a grocery list. Peter came downstairs in those city slicker loafers he never would have worn back when we used to chase fireflies in the backyard. He was texting, not even looking at me. I handed him the list. "You'll need to pick these up while I'm at my appointment." He blinked. "Wait, you're going alone?" "Yes," I said calmly. Apparently I've been doing a lot of things alone for a while. That finally got him to pause. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I didn't give him the chance to recover. I picked up my purse, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. At the clinic, I sat in the waiting room surrounded by elderly women in pastel headscarves and brave smiles. I wasn't crying, not even inside. I was thinking, not about dying, but about living, and what kind of living I had left to do. When I got home, Peter had gone out. He'd left a note on the fridge, scrawled in his quick handwriting, had to take a call. "Be back tonight. No love you. No good luck." Just that. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by linoleum and silence, and realized something unthinkable. I had given my life to someone who saw me as an inconvenience. I walked to the back bedroom and opened the cedar chest I hadn't touched in years. Inside were my journals, my savings bonds, and a stack of letters I'd never mailed. Drafts to Peter after his graduation, birthdays missed, calls unanswered. I read a few, then tucked them back in. That night, I made myself tea, sat in the old rocking chair, and turned on a record. Patsy Cline. I thought about what to do next, not just about chemo or doctors or estate paperwork. I thought about what I wanted, for the first time in decades, because if I only had 3 months left, I wasn't going to waste a single second of them on someone who hoped that was all I had. The first time Lisa knocked on my door, I was still deciding if I wanted to keep living in a world where my own son wished me gone. It had been 3 days since Peter flew back to Chicago without so much as a proper goodbye. He left a message on my voicemail. Keep me updated, I guess. Let me know if it gets worse. Lisa came recommended by the oncology office, part nurse, part companion, part human parachute for women like me, free falling through fear and medical jargon. When I opened the door, she stood there in navy scrubs with a clipboard and the kind of tired eyes that meant she'd seen enough to skip small talk. You must be Margaret, she said. I hesitated. I suppose I still am. That made her smile, not the polite kind, but a real one. She walked in, took one look at the clutter of pill bottles and mail on my kitchen counter, and said, "Let's make a plan." And just like that, a stranger started doing what my own child wouldn't, taking care of me. Lisa wasn't intrusive. She didn't coddle. She organized my meds, made sure I ate something besides crackers, and never once looked at me with pity. If anything, she looked at me like a woman who still had something to say. One afternoon, while checking my blood pressure, she asked, "What did you use to do before all this?" I shrugged. I raised Peter, worked at the school, baked a lot. She waited. When I didn't say more, she nodded slowly. "So, you spend your life making things easier for everyone else." That night, I pulled out my old spiral notebooks, the ones I'd use for church potluck recipes and grocery lists, and I started writing. Not to anyone, just for me. I wrote down the day I got the diagnosis, the way Peter didn't hold my hand, the sound of his voice saying 3 months like it was a deadline on a project he didn't want. I wrote about the birthday party I threw for him when he turned 8, how I baked a dragon cake from scratch, stayed up until 3 a.m. sculpting little marzipan wings. He didn't remember that. Of course he didn't. I wrote about the day his father left, how Peter cried so hard he threw up, how I held him all night, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep, how I kept every single one. Lisa found the notebook on the table one morning. She didn't read it, just placed a pen beside it and said, "Keep going." There was something about putting it all down that made me feel like I hadn't disappeared yet, like I still had weight in this world, a voice, a record of what had been lost and what might still be found. One morning, Lisa came by earlier than usual. "You've got a follow-up scan today," she reminded me, "and a new doctor. More bad news?" I asked, tying my scarf with hands that trembled a little less than last week. "Maybe," she said, "but maybe not." At the hospital, the new doctor was brisk and efficient, and I appreciated that. No pep talks, no metaphors, just facts. The tumor hadn't shrunk, but it hadn't grown either. Holding pattern, he called it. "We'll keep monitoring." Afterward, Lisa treated me to a drive-through milkshake. "Celebration," she said. "For what?" "For still being here." That night, I wrote in the notebook again. I wrote that I was angry, not just at Peter, but at myself, for giving up so much of who I was for the dream of a son who'd one day see me. Really see me, not as a burden or a backup plan, but as a woman who built his life on her back. I wrote that if I did only have 3 months left, I wouldn't spend them waiting for an apology. I'd spend them living louder than I ever had before. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet. The light coming through the curtains was soft and gold. I stood in the kitchen and made lemon bars, not for anyone else, just because I wanted one. I sat at the table, took a bite, and smiled to myself. Peter didn't call. Of course he didn't. But I didn't care, because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged to myself. And that was the start of something new. There's a funny thing that happens when you start thinking your time is limited. You stop caring about the nonsense. The little things that used to set you off, the dryer buzzing too loud, the neighbor's dog digging in your dahlias, they lose all power over you. And the big things, they come into razor focus. After that scan and my first milkshake in decades, I sat down and made a list. Not a bucket list, exactly. I didn't want to skydive or swim with dolphins. No, my list was smaller, quieter. It had things like clean out the garage and find the cassette of Peter's second grade recital. But it also had forgive myself and dance barefoot in the backyard at night. I didn't know if I had 3 months or 30, but I decided I wasn't going to die with unspoken thoughts and unopened boxes. Lisa came by that afternoon and found me elbow deep in a dusty Rubbermaid bin marked 1994. I had Peter's baby shoes in one hand and a yellowed envelope in the other. "What's that?" she asked, peering over. "A letter I wrote to myself when I turned 40, I said, brushing off the dust. "I was supposed to open it at 60. "You're close enough," she said. "What does it say?" I opened it. The handwriting was mine, but slanted and more hopeful. I'd written about my dreams, how I wanted to open a pie shop, maybe somewhere coastal with big windows and lemony air. I talked about wanting to travel, to Italy maybe. But most of all I wrote, "I hope you're proud of the life you built, even if it didn't go how you planned." I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a dry one. Well, 40-year-old me was a real dreamer. Lisa didn't argue. She just helped me file away the baby shoes and hand-washed an old stuffed rabbit that had lost its left eye. That evening, I drove to the lavender field just outside of town. It was something I'd always meant to do, but never got around to. Isn't that how life works? We delay joy for a future we assume is guaranteed. The field was empty, except for an old man working the far rows. The scent was heavenly, like warm sun and peace. I walked through those rows, letting my fingers graze the blossoms, purple clouds brushing my palms. And when I reached the far edge of the field, I did something no one would expect from someone diagnosed with cancer. I danced. Just me, under a pale blue sky, barefoot in soft soil. My bones ached, my chest hurt, but I twirled anyway. For myself, for the girl I used to be, for the woman I became in spite of it all. When I got home, the phone was ringing. It was Peter. I didn't pick up. Let the machine get it, I thought, because for once in my life, I was busy living. He left a message. His voice was clipped, rushed. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Call me back if you want." I guess I was wondering if we needed to talk about things. He didn't say what things. He didn't apologize. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sun dip low behind the neighbor's crooked fence. Let him wait, I thought. For once in his life, let him sit with silence and wonder if I was okay. Because now I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing what mattered. And the list? That list was just getting started. It was early June when I crossed the first big thing off my list. I booked a room at the old bed and breakfast in town. The one with the wraparound porch and lace curtains I used to admire every time I drove by, but never dared to enter. I'd always thought it was too expensive, too indulgent, too not for people like me. But something had shifted. I was tired of being practical. Practical didn't bring me peace. It certainly didn't bring me joy. I walked into the B&B with nothing but a weekend bag and a paperback I hadn't finished in over a decade. The innkeeper, Evelyn, had hair like cotton candy and hands that reminded me of my grandmother's. Soft but strong. She didn't ask questions, just gave me the magnolia room and a knowing smile. That first night, I slept like I hadn't in months, maybe years. I didn't dream of Peter or chemo or hospitals. I dreamed of lemon pie and blue skies and music I hadn't heard since high school. The next morning, I sat on the porch with coffee and watched the world pass by in slow motion. No schedule, no beeping medical machines, just wind chimes and birdsong and the rustle of someone else's newspaper. I stayed 3 nights. On the second, Evelyn joined me for tea. We got to talking about life, about how she used to be a nurse, too, before her hands got too stiff. She told me she'd buried 2 husbands and outlived 3 siblings. Grief doesn't go away, she said, but it gets quieter, like a song you still know by heart but don't always sing out loud. When I checked out, she pressed a lavender sachet into my hand. "You come back anytime, Margaret. You've got something about you, something people don't notice until it's too late." I tucked the sachet into my purse and left with the kind of ache that wasn't sadness, but gratitude. Back home, the silence returned. But this time, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like space. I began writing again, longer entries. Not just about the past, but about what I wanted the rest of my life to feel like, even if it was short. I wrote about a bakery I used to dream of opening. About the name I would have used, Sweet Resilience. About the old recipes I still remembered by heart. The pecan tarts, the banana bread with a splash of bourbon, the coffee cake with the brown sugar ribbon that always made Peter smile. Peter. He kept calling. Once, twice, then nearly every day. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't punishing him. I just wasn't ready. Until one afternoon, Lisa showed up with a look on her face like she was about to lie, but hoped I'd believe her. He came by, she said, setting my pills down a little too softly. Peter. I looked up from my notebook. You let him in. She paused. I told him you weren't here, which was technically true. Because the Margaret he's used to, she's not here anymore. I exhaled a laugh that tasted like tears. You think I'm being cruel? No, she said. I think you're being honest for the first time in a long time. That night, I finally listened to one of his voicemails. It started with a sigh and ended with, I don't know how to fix this, Mom. But I think I want to try. If that's something you still want. Still want. It was the first time he'd left a crack in his voice. Not blame. Not distance. Just rawness. I didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I opened my recipe box, pulled out a stained index card, and baked that coffee cake. The one with the brown sugar ribbon. The one Peter used to beg for when he was little and sad. I sliced 2 pieces. Ate one. Wrapped the other in foil. No note. No explanation. Just a cake. I placed it in a box and mailed it to his address in Chicago. It arrived 2 days later. He didn't call. He didn't text. But that weekend, another message arrived on my voicemail. This time, all he said was, "It tastes exactly like I remember." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry because I was broken. I cried because maybe, just maybe, something could still be repaired. It was a Tuesday when he showed up. I was sitting on the porch, wrapped in the faded yellow shawl my sister Mary had crocheted for me back when bell-bottoms were still in fashion. My tea had gone cold, but I hadn't noticed. I'd been thinking about that voicemail all morning. The one where Peter said the cake tastes exactly like I remember. 5 words, but they landed like bricks on my chest. Then there he was, in jeans too crisp and a coat too city for our neighborhood, standing at the edge of the steps like a boy outside the principal's office. "Mom," he said, quiet as the breeze. I didn't get up. He looked thinner than I remembered, maybe even tired. Guilt sits heavy on the shoulders. It'll age you faster than any illness. He fidgeted, hands in his pockets, glancing around like he half expected the house to yell at him. I was in town, he said, like that was a good enough reason. Figured I'd stop by. I nodded, sipped my lukewarm tea. I got your cake. I figured. Silence stretched between us, the kind that once would have been filled with small talk. Did you see the new neighbors? How's work? But now was crowded with things we hadn't said and maybe never would. I'm sorry, he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just plain and small and real. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. The teenager who refused to hug me at school drop-offs. The man who once whispered he hoped I'd only live 3 more months. And somehow I still loved him. I know, I said. He sat down beside me, careful not to knock over my mug. I didn't mean it, he said. What I said. I was scared. I was overwhelmed. I shrugged. And I was sick. Still am. We both said things. He looked down. But you didn't say anything cruel. No, I said, setting my mug down. But I should have said more. A long time ago. We sat there like that, mother and son, strangers and kin, until the wind picked up and the air smelled like the gardenia bush out front that hadn't bloomed since the drought. I want to help, he said. If you'll let me. That depends, I said slowly. Are you here because you feel guilty or because you want to show up for real this time? He didn't answer right away. Then, with more strength than I'd expected, he said both. But mostly the second part. I didn't say anything. Just nodded and stood up. Come inside. The tea's cold. He followed me in. And I swear I saw him glance around like the place had shrunk since he was a kid. Maybe it had. Or maybe he was seeing it differently now. That evening, we didn't talk about hospitals or appointments. We watched a movie on the old DVD player and shared a blanket like we used to on snow days. I fell asleep with my head against the pillow and woke to find a folded blanket at my feet and the dishwasher running. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a rewrite of the past. But it was a start. Lisa noticed the shift the next day. "You look taller today," she said as she checked my pulse. "I'm not," I said. "But maybe I'm standing on something new." She smiled. Or someone. I didn't say it then, but maybe that was true. Maybe Peter had stopped being the weight that dragged me down and started being the rope I could climb out with. And if this was the beginning of my last chapter, I was going to write it in bold. It was Velma who called me next. I hadn't heard her voice in maybe 15 years, not since her oldest boy graduated and moved out to Arizona. Back then, we used to sit in lawn chairs on Sundays, drinking sweet tea and pretending we weren't both dying inside from the weight of being everything for everyone. She started with, "You still making that buttermilk pie, or did your taste go bland like your ex-husband's promises?" I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. That was Velma, sharp as a tack dipped in vinegar and just as likely to sting. We met up at the park 2 days later, sat under the same maple tree that used to shade our babies while they made mud pies and chased butterflies. Her hair was snow white now, but her spirit? Untouched. She looked me over and said, "You look like hell, Maggie." "It's cancer," I said, dry as dust. "Well, damn," she said, nodding. And here I thought it was just old age creeping up ugly. We laughed again, and it felt like slipping on an old coat that still fit. I told her everything, about the diagnosis, Peter's cruelty, the coffee cake, and the slow thaw between us. She listened without flinching, her mouth pressed into a line that only softened when I mentioned Lisa. "So you got a nurse, a notebook, and a son trying to learn how not to be a jackass," she said. "Sounds like a start." Velma had her own troubles. High blood pressure. A hip that creaked like a haunted house stair. But she still wore red lipstick and told off men at the pharmacy who cut in line. "Let me tell you something," she said, as we strolled to the bench near the duck pond. "You don't owe anybody forgiveness. You give it when you feel like it. Not when they ask. Not when it's convenient." I didn't say anything, just nodded. "And while we're on the subject," she added, "you ever think about selling that house and starting fresh?" I blinked. "Selling? You've been feeding ghosts in that place for years, Maggie. Maybe it's time you got yourself some peace." It stuck with me, that word. Peace. Not healing, not closure. Peace. Quiet that doesn't ache. That night, I opened the windows. All of them. Let the wind in. Let the smell of jasmine drift through every dusty corner. I lit candles. Played Billie Holiday on the record player. Cooked dinner like I had company, even though I didn't. And I danced. Again. Right there in the kitchen, with the sauce bubbling on the stove and my slippers sliding on the linoleum. I danced not because I felt young, but because I still felt. Peter came by the next morning. He knocked, but didn't wait for me to answer. He walked in holding a carton of eggs and a loaf of bakery bread. "I thought I'd make you breakfast," he said. "Don't burn it," I muttered and smiled. We sat at the table, the one where I used to cut his pancakes into little stars. I let him talk. He told me about his job, how it wasn't fulfilling, about his apartment, how it didn't feel like home, about a girl he'd loved, but lost because he didn't know how to stay soft when life got hard. "And then I thought about you," he said, looking at his coffee like it held the answers, "and how I never really knew how much you were holding. I think I was scared to look." "That's all right," I said. I was scared too. Silence, but not the bad kind. The kind that heals. He looked up. "I know it's late, but I'd like to try." I didn't cry. I just reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't show up in big speeches. Sometimes it's a squeeze of the hand and a second slice of toast. And sometimes it's knowing you don't have to dance alone anymore. Summer came heavy that year, like it had something to prove. The heat pressed into the house, into my skin, into every breath like memory itself. My garden, once just a patch of soil meant to keep my hands busy after Peter left for college, bloomed like it was trying to outdo death. Some flowers leaned toward the porch. Snapdragons bloomed in stubborn defiance. Even the rosemary bush perked up like it had forgiven me for neglecting it. Lisa noticed first. "You're glowing," she said as she arranged my pills. "You sure you're not sneaking out at night and kissing handsome neighbors?" "No," I said, smirking. "But I did buy new curtains." She laughed, but it was true. I'd pulled down the old brown ones and replaced them with a sheer floral pattern. The light hit them just right in the morning, casting soft colors onto the floorboards. I'd sit and watch the colors move, like the house itself was dancing with me. Peter started coming by every Sunday. He'd bring bagels or blueberry muffins, depending on how early he remembered I liked lemon poppy seed. He didn't always get it right, but he was showing up, and for the first time in years, he stayed off his phone when I talked. We didn't rehash the worst of it. We never spoke about that night, what he said, how it crushed me. But I could see the way he watched me now, like he was making up for lost time in long glances and small favors. "Can I fix the mailbox?" he asked one day, noticing it leaned like a drunk on a Friday night. I shrugged. "Sure. It's been that way 10 years. So he did. Replaced the post, painted it a fresh navy blue. It looked almost too nice for the rest of the house. But when I saw it standing there, proud and sturdy, I felt something settle inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but ease. Later that week, I found a box tucked away in the back of the hallway closet, labeled Peter Art and Notes. Inside were finger paintings, macaroni portraits, and a journal he'd kept briefly in 6th grade. I flipped through the pages until I found a sentence that hit me right between the ribs. "I love my mom. She smells like cookies and knows everything." I sat on the floor, cross-legged like I was 12 again, and let that memory flood through me. That boy, the one who loved cookies and believed in magic, he was still in there somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, he was coming back. That weekend, I asked Peter if he wanted to help with the garden. He showed up in worn sneakers and a t-shirt that said, "Keep growing," some fundraiser freebie, probably, but the irony wasn't lost on me. We weeded, dug new holes, planted a batch of zinnias I'd picked up on a whim. "You always like digging in the dirt," I said, handing him the hose. "Probably because I used to bury stuff," he laughed. "Hot Wheels, action figures, sandwiches I didn't want to eat." "You buried sandwiches?" He shrugged. "Tuna mostly." I laughed so hard I had to sit down. It wasn't just the memory, it was the moment. Him, me. Dirt under our nails, the sun melting us in the best possible way. That night, as I soaked my feet and iced my knees, I looked around my little living room. Faded couch, mismatched cushions, dusty bookshelf, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Contentment. Not because everything was fixed. Not because I was cured. But because I was living in the middle of the story, not just waiting for it to end. And that's when I started writing something new in the back of my notebook. Not a list this time, but a letter. To Peter. For one day, when I might not be able to say it out loud. Because some things deserve to be heard, even if it takes a lifetime for the words to come. I didn't plan to write it all in one sitting. But once I started, the words just poured out, 23 pages in total. I wrote until the sun dipped below the blinds, and the pen ink smudged on my fingertips. The letter wasn't just for Peter, it was for me, too. A record, a reckoning, a final say, in case I didn't get one. I told him everything. How it felt to raise him alone. How I used to sneak into his room, just to listen to him breathe after his father left. How I clipped coupons for years so he could have name-brand cereal and a proper backpack. How I cried the night he graduated, not because he was leaving, but because I finally exhaled after 18 years of holding it all together. I wrote about the silence after the diagnosis, the cold hospital chair, the voicemail, the weight of those words, "Hope you only live 3 more months." I didn't write them to shame him. I wrote them because I needed him to understand the echo they left in my bones. But I didn't stop there. I wrote about the coffee cake, the Sundays, the mailbox, the garden, the way he showed up, even when I didn't ask him to, especially then. And at the end I wrote, "You hurt me, but you're still my boy, and I am proud of the man who's trying." I sealed it in a yellow envelope, tucked it into the bottom of my cedar chest, and marked it with a single word, later. Lisa found me that night on the porch, barefoot, with a cup of chamomile tea and a half-finished crossword puzzle. "You all right?" she asked. "I'm better than I've been in years," I said, and meant it. The next day, Peter brought over a sapling, lemon of all things. "For the yard," he said. "I remember you used to talk about wanting one." "I did," I said, blinking back surprise. "I just never got around to it." "Well," he said, looking at the small tree in his hands, "guess we've still got time." We planted it near the fence, where it would get the morning sun. The soil was stubborn, but we managed. When it was done, he patted the dirt like a proud father and said, "Think it'll fruit?" "I think it'll surprise us," I said. That night, I dreamed of lemon trees. Hundreds of them. Their blossoms fragrant and sweet, their branches heavy with bright fruit. In the dream, Peter was small again, picking lemons and laughing, stuffing them into the pockets of his overalls. I woke up smiling. Chemo started again that week. We didn't talk about it much. The nurse at the hospital was kind, but not Lisa. No one was. She was my anchor. "You scared?" she asked, handing me a ginger candy. "A little," I said, "but I've got more to stick around for now." Peter came to every session. He brought books, Sudoku puzzles, that ridiculous travel pillow shaped like a llama. He didn't hover, didn't lecture, he just sat. And that was enough. Back home, the lemon tree stood straight in the soil. We watered it together. Me, with my slow steps and sun hat. Him, with his quiet guilt and hopeful hands. Sometimes redemption doesn't look like an apology. Sometimes it looks like a lemon tree. The storm came without warning. The Weather Channel said scattered showers, maybe a breeze. What we got instead was a tempest, gale-force winds, tree branches snapping like brittle bones, and rain so hard it blurred the world into watercolors. Peter was already at the house, helping me clean out the attic. We were knee-deep in old linens and forgotten holiday wreaths when the power flickered, then cut completely. "Great," he muttered, flashlight beam catching a photo of him as a toddler in a cowboy hat. I smiled at the sight, then flinched as thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows. We headed downstairs with candles and flashlights, Lisa on her way but stuck behind a down tree a few blocks over. I boiled water on the gas stove for tea and laid out blankets, while Peter lit candles like we were reenacting a scene from Little House on the Prairie. It was strange how something as disruptive as a blackout could feel so sacred, like the world was forcing us to slow down. We sat on the floor in the living room, tea in hand, wrapped in mismatched Afghans. "You remember the last blackout?" I asked. He nodded. "I was 12. You made pancakes on the grill. And you cried when I wouldn't let you microwave your socks." He laughed, really laughed, like he hadn't in years. For the first time, the silence between us didn't feel loaded. It felt gentle. He looked around the room, eyes landing on the bookshelf. "You kept all my books," he said, "even the Captain Underpants ones." "Especially those," I said, nudging his shoulder. Comic genius. We talked for hours about nothing and everything. The house smelled like rain and candle wax. The shadows on the walls danced like ghosts finally exorcised. Somewhere near midnight, the wind quieted. The worst of it passed. We were left in a world softened by the storm. "I've been thinking," Peter said suddenly, his voice small, "about moving back. Not into the house, but nearby. Maybe helping more, being more present." I didn't respond right away. I just sipped my tea and watched the flame of the candle flicker. "You don't have to fix anything," I said. "Just stay." He nodded, eyes shining in the low light. When the power returned the next morning, it felt almost rude, like someone barging in during a heart-to-heart. Lisa showed up not long after, soaked and grumpy. "Leave it to you two to turn a power outage into a bonding moment," she muttered, toweling off her hair. That afternoon, Peter and I finished cleaning the attic. We found my old cassette tapes, mixes from high school, my wedding, even Peter's first birthday party. "Do you have a player for these?" he asked. "I do," I said, pulling it out of a box like a magician with a rabbit. We set it up in the kitchen, plugged in fresh batteries, and hit play. Out came scratchy warbly music. Etta James, The Supremes, Elvis Presley. My whole life in fuzzy stereo. I started to sway. Not quite a dance, not quite stillness. Just movement. And then Peter did something I'll never forget. He stood up, held out his hand, and danced with me, right there in the kitchen, under flickering light, with the lemon tree visible through the window and the past fading gently into the background. No apology, no grand speech, just my son, holding his mother in the middle of her storm. And somehow that was more than enough. 3 months came and went, not with a bang or a miracle, but quietly, like the tide inching back from the shore. I didn't count the days anymore, I lived them. That alone felt like defiance. The lemon tree started sprouting tiny buds, little green promises that life was still unfolding, even when you expected the end. Every morning, I'd walk outside with a cup of tea and check its progress. Peter built a small wooden bench beside it, engraved with the words, "Still growing." We kept things simple. Sunday breakfasts, afternoons sorting old photographs, long drives to nowhere. Lisa said I was responding to treatment better than expected, and while we didn't use the word remission, we did start using words like hopeful and stable, words I'd once rolled my eyes at. The notebook grew thick. I filled it with more than memories, recipes, letters to people I hadn't spoken to in years, dreams for the days ahead. At some point, I stopped writing about dying and started writing about living better. One morning, I opened the cedar chest to tuck in another finished journal and saw the yellow envelope marked later. It didn't feel like later anymore. That afternoon, I called Peter. "I've got something for you," I said. He came over in 20 minutes. I handed him the envelope without ceremony. "Just read it when you're ready." He looked confused, almost nervous. "Is this?" "It's not goodbye," I said. "It's just everything I never said out loud." He didn't read it right away. He slipped it into his coat pocket and hugged me longer than usual. I felt the weight of it against my shoulder, his guilt, his healing, his hope. The next day he called, voice thick. No words at first, just breath. "I read it," he finally said. "All of it. I figured. I didn't know half of that. I didn't remember the dragon cake. You were 8. He was quiet, then, "Thank you for forgiving me. For giving me the chance to be better." "You earned that chance," I said. "You just didn't know it yet." That weekend, he came by with a tin of lemon bars he made himself. They were awful, too tart, crust like concrete, but I ate every bite. Because love isn't always about perfection. Sometimes it's about effort. Sometimes it's lemon bars you choke down with a smile. A month later, he took me to the beach. It had been years since I'd seen the ocean. The air was thick with salt and memory. I sat in a folding chair, toes in the sand, wind tugging at my scarf. Peter crouched beside me, held my hand. "You still scared?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not always." "No," I said. "Not always." We stayed until sunset, the sky bleeding orange and lavender. I watched the waves roll in, one after the other. Steady, unapologetic. Just like life. Just like me. When we packed up to leave, I glanced back at the water. 3 months, they said. But I was still here. And for the first time in a long time, I hoped I'd be here a while longer. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I finally remembered how to live.